presentation is called Can You Hear Me? As Susan said, it's a phrase that I found myself saying quite a lot recently, either as a facilitator of groups of people or as a team member in my own team. But today is, well, this presentation today is all about connection and trust, and creating connection and trust between people when we're using online platforms. So you might be able to hear me audibly, but can you hear me from a relationship point of view? So that's really where we're going today. Now, as a sort of a facilitator, as a psychologist, I've been a little bit intrigued over the last few months. I've been doing a lot of my work online, and I've been wondering if there is an effect behind that. Is there something that doing work online does to the relationships that we have with each other, to the conversations that we have with each other? And actually, when you dig a little deeper and look at the research, there are some things that are happening to us when we connect online. Some of those things are conscious and we're aware of them. Some of those things are unconscious, things that we may not be aware of. So I'm going to explore those today, and I'm going to also try to give you some practical tips right at the end of today's session to help you create those relationships, create that trust when you're having your own team meetings.
Fantastic. So your 20 minutes about to start. Stuart, are you ready?
I think I'm ready.
Fantastic.
Lovely. Thank you. All right, let's go. So trust is important. Trust is important even at the best of times, when we're together back in the office, meeting each other face to face. And we know this because trusting teams sort of show to have high levels of trust and psychological safety. More about that in a minute. Those two things, those teams do much better work together. And then, of course, something happens which we're not expecting. Something like a lockdown happens to us, to our teams, to the fabric within which we do our work. And once this lockdown came about, all of my team, I don't know about yours, all of my team started to work remotely, and all of the work that we started to do was online. And it got me thinking, well, what chance do we have of creating truly trusting relationships if all of the work we're doing is remote, if all of the work we're doing is through platforms like this one? So I wanted to ask that question. I did a little bit of research, a little bit of digging around into neurobiology, a little bit of digging around into psychotherapy. And this talk today is a little bit about what I've found. Now, I'm going to say right from the start that Zoom, Adobe Connect, Teams, all of these things are wonderful things. And I would not argue that we shouldn't be using them. They are much better than emails. They are much better than picking up the phone. They're fantastic tools for us to leverage. But what I'd like to do is to suggest at the end of this session today that perhaps we need to be a little bit more vigilant when we are using these online platforms. Perhaps we need to try a little bit harder in how we're having these conversations in order to get the best out of these platforms as well. So that's going to be my argument, and I wanted to break down this presentation into 3 parts. So the first part is, when we're working online, what does it do to me, to you, to us? What's the impact of that? The second part of this presentation is why this matters. So why does it matter that there could be something going on that we don't necessarily recognize unconsciously when we meet together online? Why does that matter? What does it do to the work that we're doing together? And the third thing is, what can we do about it? If working online does have an impact on us, what are some things, what are some tips that we can take back from this session that we can apply back at work? Okay, so let's just start with the first part here, what happens to our interactions. Now, working online does have an impact on how we relate to each other. It has an impact in 3 areas. The first area is how we relate. So what happens to our relationships? The second area is how we attend to each other, how we pay attention to each other. And the third area is all about how we make judgments about each other. So I'm going to spend 5 minutes in that first section. And I was going to start my introduction to that section by asking you a question. Is this me? Is this me? It kind of looks like me. It sounds a little bit like me. But if you've ever worked with me, you'll know that I'm not just 2 inches tall. that my voice isn't quite as tinny and as nasally as you can hear now, although it's not far off. But your brain is looking at this image of me, this little 2-inch image of me, and it's a little bit confused. It's not quite what you expect. I don't quite sound the same. I don't quite look the same. And when you look at the research, there is some suggestion that when we're not hearing what we expect or seeing what we expect, our mirror neurons aren't firing in the same way. And mirror neurons are really important for empathy. They're the neurons that allow us to feel pain when we see somebody else is in pain. So these things are really important for creating empathy. So already there's a sort of slight barrier between me and you because you're looking at this little image of me on the screen. So then what happens? Well, if this was a face-to-face interaction, if we were in the same room and there was a lack of empathy, what I'd try to do is I'd try to make eye contact with you, which is so important for creating trusting relationships. But I don't know about you, trying to create eye contact online is really difficult. Is it even possible to lock eyes with somebody when you're on Zoom or Adobe Connect? I've tried, it's really difficult. So we've got that avenue that's a little bit stifled for us as well. Now, if neurologically this image of me is distracting for you, think about how distracting it might be for me as well. And this is the final part of this part of the presentation. How distracting is it when you've got your own little image on the screen? There's a very curious thing that happens here. Psychologists have been talking about this for a long, long time. They call it a correspondence problem. And a correspondence problem is when I don't quite know what is happening in our relationship. I can't see myself in my own interactions. I can't see myself as I'm talking to you. I don't know how I'm coming across. The only way I can judge that is if I look at you and your behavior and how you're reacting to me. Is there a correspondence between what I'm doing and what I'm hoping you're getting from my expressions? Now, that's hard if I'm in a room with you. Am I being the kind of person you want me to be or you need me to be? But it's really, really hard when I'm on an online platform with you because I've got this little 2-inch image of myself in the bottom of the screen. And suddenly I'm sort of looking down there. I'm distracted by myself. And I'm trying to figure out if I'm being the person you need me to be. And all of a sudden, of course, my attention goes and that relational moment has gone. So there are some ways in which that little image can be distracting and it can affect how we relate to each other. Working online also can affect how we attend to each other. Here's a picture of a man in a cow costume having a meeting online. And I thought I would turn up today wearing a shirt for you. And that's kind of important because I want you to know that I care how I come across, how you see me. Psychologists sometimes call this the sense of being held. Am I holding you? Are you holding me? So in other words, if I show you that I care about you, you're much more likely to show me that you care about me. But the thing is with these online interactions is that sometimes we sort of rock up to these sessions and I'm not saying we're wearing pajamas, but we might not be as tuned in as we possibly could be. And if it seems like I don't really care, then there's a chance that you might not really care either. And if that is happening, probably the depth of our conversation isn't going to be as meaningful and as deep and as authentic as it could be. To give you an idea of this, occasionally during our sessions that we have with our participants, we will see a participant and suddenly somebody will come in and give them a cup of tea, or they'll look at their phone, they'll check their messages to see what's been happening, or their dog will come in and they'll pat their dog. And actually that is a signal that, again, that I'm not investing in this interaction, and blink and that moment has gone. And there's a third way in which online interactions can affect us as well. Now, when we're all together in a room some really interesting things can happen to our physiology. So if I'm talking to you and you've got a smile on your face and you're looking relaxed, what happens then is that creates a smile on my face, and I begin to get a bit relaxed as well. And there becomes this lovely virtuous circle. The more relaxed and safe you feel with me, the more relaxed and safe I feel with you. But then what happens when we are doing work like this? I'm not getting the tsunami of interpersonal data that I would usually get if I was in the room with you. And if I'm not getting that data, how safe do I feel with you, and how safe do you feel with me? This is quite important. A lot of studies suggest that trust increases by about 40% when we have access to these non-verbal cues. So I wonder how much trust can be created if I'm only seeing you sort of from the shoulders up, if I'm not seeing all of your body. And again, the data suggests that emotional fluency when we're working online also becomes impacted. We don't recognize emotions as well as we could do. So these are just sort of 3 ways in which online interactions can impact the quality of our interactions with each other. And you might say, well, you know, that's fine. That's interesting, interesting data. But honestly, the last 6 months, they've not been too difficult. Me and my team seem to be getting on quite well. We're getting good work done. And I think we can continue this way. And that's great. And it's great if that is happening for you. I would say that there are slight risks, though, if there is an impact on trust between us having a conversation like this online. There might be a few risks with regards to doing the work that we do well, doing the work that we do safely, and doing the work that we do responsibly. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes now in this second part of my presentation just talking about that. Well, we know from research at Google that when teams have members in them that regularly check in with each other, that regularly ask each other how they're doing, and that and where there is a high level of psychological safety, this ability to be able to speak up honestly without fear of retribution. When those things happen in teams, those teams are usually highly engaged and they're usually doing better work. So trust is important just for the quality of the work that we're doing. It also impacts on how we do work safely. So again, coming back to psychological safety, if I know that to speak up and to talk about something that's difficult and potentially risky is okay in this team, and it's encouraged by my boss and other people in the team, then I'm much better able to have conversations about real safety in the real world, about safe behaviors that I see in other people or not. So there's a sense that online psychological safety is probably a little bit more difficult to come by. It's easier to zip up and not to say anything when we're interacting online. And there's a slight concern here that that might have impacts on the actual safety of the work that we do together. This brings us on to the third point, which is about doing work responsibly. When I'm in the office, I get to watch other people do work, and they role model to me what good work is all about. They let me know what a good decision is, how to behave around one's colleagues. And I guess there's a slight concern at the moment for those people who are joining their teams for the first time. They haven't had a chance to meet face to face. Where are they going to get those cues about what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior? It's a little bit more difficult now because we don't get to observe it everywhere we look in our environment. So in the first part, we talked about the fact that our online interactions can impact on the degree of trust that I might have with you as a team member, as a peer, as a boss. In the second part, we looked at why this might matter, how this impacts on us doing good work, safe work, and responsible work. And in the final part, I'd like to just give you some tips. Again, it's important to note that Zoom is a fantastic tool. It is the best chance we've got of creating really good, trusting relationships. So let's just think about how we can leverage it even better. So tip number one is trying to create authentic interactions. So we talked about it earlier. It's really important that we see each other's nonverbal communication. So turn your microphones on, turn your cameras on when you can. And if you can do that in your team meetings, wonderful. There might be some issues of psychological safety for some team members. So you might want to ask people for their permission for them to turn their cameras on. We shouldn't order it of people if they're uncomfortable with it. But having all of that interpersonal data, that nonverbal data coming in can really help us as a team to understand what we're thinking and feeling. Think about where you look. One of the things that can be a little bit creepy if you're in a small group or in pairs is when you look directly at the camera. That doesn't always work. That works brilliantly if you're speaking to a large group. If you're speaking to a small group, what's often great is if you can look at the person in their screen, because you're reacting to them and they're reacting to you. You can see their expressions, they can see your expressions. So fix your eyes on the person you're speaking to. It does really work. Something that we've learned through our online workshops is not to overuse technology. Just because we've got a whiteboard and we can do polls doesn't mean to say we should always be using that technology. They're great at bringing people into the conversation and making the presentation perhaps a little bit more engaging. But I would put the opportunity for authentic interaction above that. So create opportunities for people to have real conversations about real things. That's better. And that relates to the last point here about creating intimacy. And being online doesn't necessarily create a conducive environment for people sharing personal things, but this might be an extra reason why we should try. Brené Brown, the famous author on authenticity, has talked at length about vulnerability, sharing if we're not comfortable with something, sharing if we're perhaps feeling unsure about things. And at this time, a lot of people are feeling unsure about things. The world has sort of been turned on its head. So let's be a little bit more vulnerable with each other. Tip number 2 is turning up well. Woody Allen once said 80% of success is turning up. So how do we turn up when we're on these Zoom calls, these Teams calls? One of the things that could help is to just think about your own internal state before you click accept and bounce into the meeting. So how are you feeling? What is happening with your body? What is your face doing? Are you smiling? Are you relaxed? Think about the emotional condition you're in before you join the call, because other people will be looking for those cues when they see your face online. Setting the tone is perhaps something we can all do, perhaps just tuning into these meetings a little bit earlier and trying to create that sort of water cooler chit chat before we get into the real work. That helps us just to create, again, that sense of psychological safety I was talking about earlier. And the last one here is words, music, and dance. What do we say? How do we say it? And what do we do with our bodies? Research suggests that actually people pay a lot more attention to the tone of your voice rather than what it is that you're saying. So pay attention to the kind of intonation you're using when you speak. And that dance piece is about what we're doing with our hands, what we're doing with our faces. Be flamboyant, show how you are reacting to people, show the emotions that are going on when you're working online, because these are the only cues that people have got. So use your body to show people that you are engaged, which brings us nicely onto tip number 3, which is about using our body to show that we're listening. Coaches have been telling us this for a long time. We need to listen to understand rather than listen to respond. So most of us, when we listen, we have this temptation to listen to respond. We're hearing somebody and we're thinking, oh, I've got a good, interesting point to make here, or I think they might be wrong about that, or that I've got something even better to say. And actually, if we are truly listening, we are emptying our bubble and we are being curious and we're trying to tune in to what it is that they're actually trying to talk to us about. So we should ask questions. We should be curious. We should also allow pauses within our online meetings as well. Something that can be difficult to do. I think there's this sort of residue from listening to radio stations. You know, it's a big sin in radio to have dead air. Actually, on Zoom calls, on Teams calls, it's a real blessing. Allow that silence to sit. Let quieter members speak up. Let people register what it is that's being talked about. And I've mentioned the last piece already, listening with our body, orientating ourselves towards the camera, leaning in and showing that we're listening. Now, tip 4, I've got a couple more tips for you, 6 in total. This is number 4, and this is about facilitation. Now, we've got a picture of somebody here presenting. This is your expert presenter in front of a crowd. It's kind of what I'm attempting to do now. I'm in that presenter mode. This isn't really an interaction. It's me presenting some ideas to you. Actually, in Zoom meetings, in Teams meetings, in Skype meetings, we should be aiming for this. This is an example of dialogic facilitation. This isn't about me presenting my stuff to you. It's not even about me asking you questions or you asking me questions. My job as a team member, as a team leader, is to try and get you to ask each other questions. Is to create dialogue between the constituents of this meeting. So one of the things that we can do here is we can, for example, put the gallery view function on so that everybody can see each other. We can look at the reactions of each other and we can pull people into the conversation much better. So dialogic facilitation is what we should be aiming for, creating conversation in our virtual room. Embracing conflict is about leaning into disagreement. It's about bringing people in with views that might be different from other people. It's about giving everybody a chance to say what they need to say and to disagree, and rewarding and encouraging disagreement where it's required. And the last one here is about creating a container. This is another phrase that Brené Brown uses. One way to create a sense of safety and a sense of relaxation in these Zoom calls is to be sure that we let everybody know what is expected of them within the call. So what is good behavior in this call? What is not acceptable behavior in this call? Where do we want to go with this call after an hour? It's setting a container for the session so that we all know what's expected of us and we can all relax and feel a little bit more comfortable. Tip number 5 is about role modeling our values. I spoke a little bit earlier about safety and responsibility. And I think there's something here for both team leaders and team members. When we see behavior that isn't conducive to our team's charter or our values as an organization, we need to flag it up. It's much easier in this virtual world to not do that. So we really must encourage and reward people who are able to speak up and give each other feedback that might be a little bit difficult at times. And we probably spoke about things in February that really mattered back then. Maybe we had vision or mission statements that we had agreed upon. Maybe we had a team charter that we'd agreed upon. These things are just as important now as they were back in February. So we need to concentrate and focus still on what matters. It is easy to get caught up in a little bit of the complexity of what's happened over the last few months. But let's focus really on what it is that this team is trying to do and bring us back to that point. And my final tip is around practicing forgiveness. One of the things I've noticed in some of my own meetings and some of the meetings that I've facilitated is that when people go into Zoom calls or Skype calls, we go quickly to the work. We go quickly to the projects, the business. And I think sometimes when we do that, our language changes subtly. We use language that sounds a little bit more judgment focused or assessment focused. And that can create defensiveness at times. So let's think about the words that we use when we're in these interactions. Let's forgive others for not being perfect. If somebody isn't quite as professional and polished as they would otherwise be during these meetings, that's okay. We're all struggling at the moment. And let's forgive ourselves as well for perhaps not being perfect either. We're all trying to chase this illusion of non-mediation, this illusion of having a fluid, wonderful, well-connected conversation as if we were together in the same room. It's possible, but it's difficult, and we should forgive ourselves if it doesn't quite happen every single time. Those are my 6 tips, and I wanted to finish with a final word. Some of us are still working remotely. Some of us don't know how long we'll be doing this. It seems at the moment in many parts of at least the UK, a lot of us are very happy in this situation. So I guess a small challenge to you before we finish up is just to ask you a little bit about sustainability and what you're doing to ensure that not only that we've got the same levels of trust coming out of this pandemic as we had going into it, but that we've actually built upon that trust. And the final provocation I might make is, well, what, as a leader, as a peer, as a direct report, what do you want people to be saying about you once this pandemic is over? And I think there are great things we can do right now to ensure that those relationships are still kept solid and that we are still working very well together as a good, trusting, cohesive unit. And I'm not sure if that's 20 minutes. I'm probably a little bit over. Sorry, Susan.
No, Stuart, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I feel like I've learned such a lot from you, but I do realize I now need to go and learn to sing and dance so that I can entertain people when I'm online. So thank you. I'm going to ask our lovely audience, if you've got any questions for Stuart, please add them to the chat panel. Judith, thank you for coming along. I'll say wave goodbye to you now. Thank you for coming. While I'll give our audience a few moments to chat, type in their questions, but I have actually got a couple here that were sent through by people who weren't going to be able to come along today. So let me just open them up and ask you those. Just gives our people, I can't open up my phone. Here we are. Okay. So the first one I think is a really interesting one. You mentioned culture when you were going through the presentation. So it's relatively, well, I won't say it's relatively straightforward because culture is never easy, but when you're in the same environment, you can see the behaviors of other people. You can see what the culture feels like, looks like in an organization. How do you do that when you are working remotely?
So I think it's hard, and I think there's a sort of an extra level of vigilance that needs to be that's required. So when I think about culture, I do think of this phrase psychological safety again, and rewarding folk for speaking up and talking truth to power and being honest. So creating an environment where people feel that they can speak up and contribute, and that every contribution is not only accepted but rewarded as well. So and you know, psychological safety is quite hard to do, I think, virtually. So there are things that we can do to encourage it, which is, you know, just some of the normal things you might do in day-to-day life, just taking a few moments out to hear from everybody, have processes like having a sort of a round robin at the beginning, at the end of, and at the end of every meeting, just to ensure that everybody's heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, thank you. John, I should say, in the chat is asking a question. What are your thoughts on standing before the camera on a Zoom or video call? You're smiling there, so you've got an answer. Well,
I've considered it. There is a wonderful TED Talk, and the name of the lady will come to me in a moment, but she talks about power poses. And actually what happens when you stand up straight and you expand your chest and you express yourself with your arms is that you think much more fluidly and much more clearly. And your confidence just sort of rockets. So I've seen people do it, and I've seen them do it really well. I think you just have to have the right setup for it as well. So one of those little desks, those cool little desks that move up and down would be useful. So I would absolutely encourage it. Now, one of the things that we've tried at my company is to stand up next to a flip chart if we have something complicated to explain. That can also work as well, but there's a bit of a warning sign there. Even though flip charts are lovely and fluid and we can gesticulate and we can write and we can add things, they're not easy to see, even with somebody on speaker view. So do your work on your flip chart, standing up, do your typical presentation, but then always have those points at some point on the screen for people to see as well. But yeah, I'd encourage you to stand up, absolutely.
Good answer. John, maybe you can let us know how it goes. We'll look back from here and how your power poses go. Okay, here's a great question from Adam. I heard from somebody at the Open University that relationships built purely online, such as via Zoom, but having never met in person, are built more quickly and more strongly than those built in person. I find this hard to believe and to reconcile with what I personally experience, as well as with some of the things you've mentioned. Have you come across this, and is there any truth in it?
I haven't come across it. I would love to hear where that comes from. One of the things that is happening at the moment, like I guess in many industries, is that there's a lot of data coming out. A lot of people experiencing, at least anecdotally, different things. I think in a year's time, we'll look back at some wonderful research that a number of PhD students have done, and we'll know a little bit about where the truth is here. I've taken my lead from some psychotherapists who are working in this area and what they have expressed in terms of what they've noticed. And this idea of being held is really important. When we're together face to face, there is a little bit of risk in our relationship. We're a little bit more well behaved with each other. If I'm in front of you and I'm speaking to you, I'm not just going to look away and look at my phone. And you get a sense from me that I'm engaged with you. I think online, there's more permission for me to do that. So I think relationships might be built a little bit more quickly, but I would want to ask how connected those people are, how deep those relationships are. And I'd come back to an earlier point as well. I do think Zoom is brilliant for getting quickly into the work thing. So one of my clients has had to induce 8 people into his team over the last 6 months. They've never met each other. He's never met them. And he's been really surprised by how quickly they've gotten to the work. So that absolutely can happen. We can be productive and we can get on well. But I would want to ask some questions about the quality of those relationships. One of the things that, sorry.
I'm sure we could all talk to you all day, Stuart, because it's such a fascinating subject, but we have got a couple more questions.
Sure.
Conscious of time, so we'll maybe get to, there's another one here online. I'll come to your one last, Roger, if that's okay. It just links to what you were saying there about new people in the organization. Question that came in, which is, how can we create trust with people we have never met in the real world? That links to what you're saying, that yes, we can be productive. New employees can be brought in and be very productive, but how do we create trust if we've never met them?
That's great, and that's kind of where I was just going, and I'm sort of thinking back to some work a number of years ago that I was doing in the area of virtual teams and how we set up and create good virtual team environments for teams that are globally represented and would meet very rarely. One of the pieces of advice is that we gave was actually encouraging them to get together at some point, at regular points. So if a team is coming together, it needs to create a charter. If we can get together for that session, that would be wonderful. So you don't have to get together every month, but at the beginning of your journey together, there should be 1 or 2 times to meet up face to face. And what the experts tend to be telling us is that if you are going to work virtually, when you do have those few very critical moments for being together in the same room, what we should be doing is we should be working on the process rather than the project or the output. So we should spend that time thinking about things like, what is good behavior in this team? What are our values in this team? What are some of the more essential processes for how we do this project, how we meet online, how we're going to manage timings? So we talk about the how rather than the what. So if your team is coming together for the first time, do try and create some semblance of a real life in-person interaction. And if you do, spend that time thinking about the process rather than the output.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. And I just want to come back to Adam just very briefly. Adam, if you've got that research from the Open University, you can maybe share it with myself and I'll pass it on to Stuart. Really interesting to see what that is. Okay, Roger, our last question for today. The question is, why are we defaulting to video calls for one-to-one meetings? Should we be encouraging people to use the good old telephone? At least you can get up and walk around and even go outside. So what's your thoughts on that one, Stuart?
I love that comment. So we've been playing with this idea as well. So I think when we're having team meetings, it is nice to see everybody, to see that all that nonverbal data that's coming in. It allows us, particularly if you're in a management position, it allows you to pick up on cues of, for example, displeasure or stress, of confusion. It provides you with really good data. We've been running a program this week where we've been working with groups of managers from all over an organization, and they've been in pretty intense conversations with each other, often coaching each other on things that are really happening in their real life. And we've encouraged them to pick up the phone and go for a walk. So they do a kind of a walk and talk process. And I think sometimes that can be also a lovely way to allow me to really hear what you're saying. So if I'm one-to-one with somebody and I'm helping them, I'm coaching them, maybe I don't need to have those visual cues. Maybe I just need to really, really listen. And these sessions have been great. People have gone for a walk just down the street or into their local park, and they've had half an hour of coaching with their peer who's in their town doing the same thing. And that can work really nicely. So I wouldn't ever say don't pick up the phone. I think there are times on a one-to-one level where really good active listening can be enhanced by picking up the phone. I think if we're in a team though, or if it's important for us to really pick up the emotions of the person that we're speaking to, it's great to have that data, that visual data.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hope that answered your question, Roger. I'll be looking out for you giving me a quick call, one-to-one. Just give me the warning so I can be outside walking around at the same time. Stuart, thank you so much. That's been a really fascinating presentation. I really enjoyed it. I hope our participants on the call today enjoyed it. I don't know, have we got another slide, Stuart?
Yep. So that's, yes.
There we go. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.
And for our participants online, as you know, we do these Tech20s every Friday. So if you click on the QR code there, you'll be able to find out what's happening next Friday. And we'd love you to come along to our next session. If you've got any more questions for Stuart, or you'd like to keep the conversation going, if you follow us on LinkedIn, we'll be posting, you can post some questions there and we can answer them there. And thank you very much for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed the session today and have a super weekend. Thank you. Stuart, are we allowed to wave? Is that okay?
We should wave. Yeah. That's nonverbal data, isn't it?
Jazz hands. Bye.
Thanks.